Delaware is the first state, it was also the first to hide its secrets. In these historic homes and abandoned coastlines, the darkness never left. They died here. They stayed here. Lock your screen. Turn up the volume. We reveal the definitive, bone-chilling countdown of the top 15 haunted places in Delaware. 1. Fort Delaware, Pea Patch Island. Fort Delaware, located on the desolate mud flats of Pea Patch Island, functioned as a brutal Union prison during the Civil War. Designed for two, the compound swelled to over 12,000 inmates by 1864, creating a crucible of suffering fueled by smallpox, typhoid, and starvation. The resulting mortality rate left thousands buried in the marshy ground across the river. Modern structural assessments confirm high levels of residual energy, often manifesting as extreme temperature drops, and auditory phenomena inconsistent with natural sources. Investigators focus specifically on the officers' quarters and the dark, dank casemates where the isolation and dread were absolute. The documented occurrences range from phantom footsteps heard patrolling the ramparts to sudden, overpowering smells of institutional cooking and unwashed bodies. Olfactory echoes that vanish as quickly as they emerge, leaving only the smell of brine and damp stone. The most unsettling reports involve the sounds of frantic, hacking, coughing, and the distinctive, despairing cries attributed to the afflicted prisoners. This oral distress is frequently recorded in the bunkers A and B areas, historical locations of extreme overcrowding and fatality, often peaking between 0200 and 0400 hours. There is no simple explanation for the spectral illumination frequently reported within the Casemate 12 area after midnight, nor for the chilling phenomenon of disembodied whispering that responds directly to historical questions posed by researchers. The fort remains a cold, unyielding monument to extreme human stress, where the suffering is not merely remembered but actively recurs. 2. Woodburn Mansion, Dover. Woodburn Mansion, completed circa 1790 in Dover, Delaware, did not become the governor's official residence until 1965. Yet its reputation for the spectral preceded its state acquisition by well over a century. The most cited origin of the haunting is deceptively mundane, almost comedic. An 1850s incident involving a burglar who, having sampled too much of the owner's fine sherry, was cornered and chose to escape by draping himself in a sheet and uttering moans. The owner, Charles Hilliard, Jr., fled the property in terror. This simple act of drunken deception imprinted an enduring folklore on the estate, suggesting the mansion's primary specter is merely a clever trickster. However, subsequent residents and staff report manifestations far more complex and decidedly less jovial than a costumed thief. Modern observations suggest the initial legend opened a door that subsequent generations could not close. Staff charged with maintaining the historic residence have documented persistent cold spots and the unnerving scent of aged wine, often emanating directly from the second-floor study where the original theft occurred. There are consistent accounts of an elderly woman seen briefly on the main staircase, always descending toward the foyer, wearing clothes appropriate to the early Victorian era. This silent figure is often followed by the disturbance of objects, particularly books moved or rearranged on display shelves dedicated to Delaware history. More disturbing, however, are the sounds reported from the unused third-floor servant quarters. Quiet, relentless weeping and the distinct, urgent rattle of a brass doorknob, suggesting attempts at entry that never result in a visible presence. Only the inescapable anxiety of being watched from the floor above the sitting governor. 3. Rockwood Mansion, Wilmington, Newcastle County. Rockwood Mansion, completed in the 1850s by Quaker merchant Joseph Shipley, is a rare example of English rural Gothic architecture transplanted to the Delaware landscape. Its deliberate design, a cloistered estate meant to evoke a pastoral English manner, contrasts sharply with the documented trauma within its limestone walls. Shipley intended Rockwood to be a secluded dynasty seat, but the house quickly became known for misfortune, particularly among the extended family that inherited it upon Shipley's death in 1885. Investigations focus heavily on the mansion's second floor and the original family chambers, areas where temperature fluctuations defy logical explanation, often plummeting dozens of degrees within feet of active heat sources. A common indicator of localized spectral activity, the most frequently cited entity is Elizabeth Lizzie Shipley, Joseph's great-niece, who died tragically at Rockwood shortly after her wedding. Accounts describe her presence as sorrowful, intrinsically tied to the grand spiral staircase which dominates the central hall. Witnesses, often maintenance staff or historical researchers, report hearing nonspecific, faint rustling sounds, the sound of heavy silk moving in an otherwise silent room originating near the master suite, where Lizzie spent her brief married life. This auditory phenomenon is generally coupled with the distinct sensation of being observed by a discreet but mournful presence, rarely aggressive but profoundly affecting to those who encounter it. Modern paranormal research posits that the isolation Joseph Shipley imposed on Rockwood helped concentrate this lingering, deeply personal grief. The Shipley family's history is literally etched into the manor's infrastructure, a classic residual haunting of propriety and tragedy. Even today, the figure of a dark-haired woman is occasionally seen peering from the upper windows facing the park, a fixed, silent observation that suggests the family never truly left the estate they built to last forever. Fair, Addy Sea Inn, Bethany Beach. The Addy Sea Inn, established near the turn of the century, carries an architectural eccentricity unique to its original owner, John M. Addy. Beneath the floorboards of the second story, an elaborate sound resonator was reportedly installed, a crude, pre-electric amplifier intended to carry specific frequencies through the heavy structure. Addy maintained the property until his death, and this unique construction detail has long been theorized as the conduit for the severe acoustic phenomena that persist today. Unlike traditional hauntings that rely on visual apparitions, the Addy Sea is characterized by deep structural intrusion. The documented activity centers specifically around Room 6, an area long believed to be Addy's original study. Guests consistently report the unmistakable sound of a heavy wooden rocking chair moving across a bare floor, or originating directly within the walls of their own adjacent rooms. This grinding sound always precedes a distinct, rhythmic tapping, strictly 3 consecutive knocks. Investigations by structural engineers have consistently failed to attribute the noises to settling or external sources. The structure seems to generate this low-frequency resonance internally, trapping it within the ancient wood and plaster. The chilling implication is that Addy's unique architectural innovation does not merely transmit noise. It focuses and amplifies residual energy. What was intended as a strange, early acoustic device now functions as a perpetual tuning fork for the deceased owner. The sound of the chair and the triple knock are not heard from a distant, hidden source. They are experienced as originating from the very substance of the building, a century-old vibration sustained by the structural bones of the inn itself, signaling an occupancy that cannot be evicted. The Addy Sea does not house a ghost. It resonates with one. Sig. Cooch's Bridge, Newark area. Cooch's Bridge, near Newark, Delaware, is the site of the state's sole Revolutionary War battlefield. On September 3rd, 1797, American light infantry clashed fiercely with British and Hessian forces under General Howe. Historical records confirm high casualties, particularly among the Hessian mercenaries, whose bodies were hastily interred in shallow graves along the Christina River. The land, still crossed by modern Route 4, remains saturated with the violence of the encounter. Since the 19th century, local reports detail auditory phenomena near the bridge, often in the early morning mirroring the battle's timing. These are not whispers, but distinct, localized sounds of musketry, shouted German commands, and the rhythmic thudding of marching boots on soil where no traffic passes. Investigative teams have documented sudden, sharp temperature drops near the original foundation stones. The most infrequent but compelling claims involve brief, dark apparitions identified by tricorn hats and the distinctive red trim of Hessian uniforms, glimpsed near old abutments before dissolving into the mist above the Christina River. The haunting at Cooch's Bridge suggests a localized energetic residue linked to the hasty burial of foreign soldiers who died violently on foreign soil. The activity, primarily auditory, serves as a non-visual replay of the 1777 skirmish. It is a continuous clinical documentation of unresolved military trauma played out across the modern highway shoulder. The bridge does not memorialize the event, it simply records it. 6. Deer Park Tavern, Newark, Newcastle. The structure at 108 West Main Street, the Deer Park Tavern, has stood witness to nearly 3 centuries of history in Newark. Established in the 1740s as the Stag's Head, the building was a vital coaching inn on the Newcastle Post Road, providing lodging and respite for travelers, including figures like George Washington. This function as a highly transient hub meant frequent turnover, often hosting laborers and those operating on the fringes of established society, a common characteristic of such historic commercial outposts. This constant, shifting influx of temporary residents forms the unnerving foundation for the persistent reports of both residual and intelligent hauntings that plague the establishment to this day. Particularly on the upper floors and around the old central stairwell, the most disturbing and frequent claim centers around the spirit of a woman, usually identified in local lore as a working prostitute or a young servant, who reportedly met a tragic and violent end inside the inn, specifically in the northwest corner rooms now utilized for storage or private dining. Though definitive historical records of the incident are scarce, the enduring legend suggests she was either murdered by a client she hosted upstairs or, in the most widely circulated account, intentionally fell or was pushed down the narrow wooden staircase. Staff frequently report furniture moving when the building is entirely empty, drastic and localized shifts in temperature near the landing, and the distinct, disembodied sound of a woman weeping late at night. This auditory activity is often accompanied by the subtle scent of aged lavender, a fragrance historically used by working women of the era to mask cheaper perfumes or illness. The phenomenon reported is consistently reactive, suggesting an intelligent haunting rather than simple residual energy. Bartenders and kitchen staff have reported hearing their names whispered clearly when they are closing the venue alone, or witnessing hazy, dark shapes that appear anchored at the top of the staircase before rapidly dissipating upon being approached. In one documented incident from the late 1990s, a server was allegedly shoved by an unseen force while clearing tables near the upstairs dining area, resulting in a minor but unexplained fall. The activity consistently peaks when the tavern closes for the night and the structure reverts to its 18th century solitude, suggesting the spirit remains intrinsically linked to the inherent misery of her final, unquiet hours within the confines of the historic inn. 7. Lums Pond State Park, Newcastle County. Lums Pond, unlike natural bodies of water, exists as a deliberate hydrological monument, engineered in the 1820s to supply the Chesapeake and Delaware Canal. This engineered history is often overlooked by hikers enjoying the perimeter trails. The pond's vast expanse covers a deep, muddy valley floor where homes and ancient waterways once existed. a massive grave site created by the imperatives of 19th century commerce. The rapid construction of the canal system, particularly the necessary locks and earthworks requiring the filling of this basin, was notorious for its harsh conditions. Records from the period indicate numerous, undocumented fatalities among the immigrant and transient labor forces, men simply vanishing into the muck or drowning during sudden flooding events. Local accounts today frequently focus on the southwestern edge, near the remnants of old pilings. Investigators using thermal and acoustic imaging near the deepest parts of the pond have registered anomalous signatures consistent with human mass or movement below the thermocline. Yet divers find nothing substantial. Witnesses walking the narrow land bridge report hearing distinct, sudden splashes from the center of the dark water, sounds that mimic a heavy body impacting the surface, often followed by muffled, distressed calls for help that fade before rescue can be initiated. This phenomenon is particularly noted on cool, clear nights when atmospheric pressure is high, suggesting a localized, persistent, energetic echo of the trauma embedded in the sediment below. The disturbance is never traceable back to living persons or natural wildlife. The depth holds what history buried. Ace, Cape Henlopen State Park, near Lewis coastal area. Cape Henlopen, where the Delaware Bay meets the Atlantic, is known locally as the graveyard of the Atlantic. The constant, wind-driven erosion ensures the coastline is never static. Beneath the migrating dune system, the park holds the remains of countless vessels, briefly exposed during severe storms before the sand reclaims them. This unstable landscape became Fort Miles in the 1940s. A crucial coastal defense battery, the site's danger was magnified during Woitu, where sentries patrolling the beaches often mistook the shifting shadows of the sand fences for approaching U-boats or something far less tangible. Reports cataloged by park staff and local fishermen document concentrated anomalous activity near Battery 519 and the oldest Great Dune sections. The phenomena are sensory, not visual, adhering to profound temperature drops, far exceeding localized wind chill near exposed concrete foundations. Most disturbing are the auditory records. The sound of heavy boots scraping on sand where no one walks, or a deep, guttural sound of metal grating on rock emanating from beneath the dune itself. These sounds are often accompanied by the distinct smell of salt, oil, and sulfur, persisting long after the alleged source has passed. The true horror of Henlopen is its perpetual instability. These hauntings are symptoms of an environment where the bodies of the drowned and the fallen are denied true repose. The shifting sands eternally churn, constantly disrupting their rest. Witnesses have seen brief, translucent figures staggering through the fog near the former firing range, often appearing disoriented, not aggressive, merely attempting to find a final solid patch of ground, a stability the Cape refuses. They remain trapped within the restless, unforgiving boundary between land and sea. Noi, Indian River Life-Saving Station at near Rehoboth Beach. The Indian River Life-Saving Station, operational from 1876, was a fixed point against the relentless brutality of the Delaware shoals. The surfmen lived by strict protocol, defined by the heavy routine of patrols and the dread of the signal flare. A rigid structure intended to save lives, but frequently defeated by the Atlantic's sheer volatility. Situated precariously between bay and ocean, the station became less a sanctuary and more a monument to the drowned men its crews could not retrieve. This profound historical weight of systematic failure is the undeniable source of the site's persistent residue. The true haunting resides in the cumulative guilt of failed rescues, documented meticulously in the station logs. During severe nor'easters, surfmen frequently logged distress signals they could not respond to, with violent conditions prohibiting the launch of the heavy surf boat. They describe finding schooners reduced to ribs hours later, retrieving only the frozen corpses of men known to have drowned within earshot of the station bell. This recurrent pattern of late discovery and subsequent retrieval created a pervasive moral exhaustion that saturated the physical structure, chronicling the acute limits of human effort against the overwhelming power of the sea. Today, observers report strictly scheduled auditory phenomena in the hours before dawn, when the patrol would have been preparing for the long march. The rhythmic dragging of heavy, soaked boots is often heard across the floorboards of the empty boat room. Most unsettling are the infrequent but distinct reports of the Lyle gun discharging a heavy, muffled thud of expended black powder echoing across the dark marshland. The air remains still, and the rescue cannon inert. It is the inescapable sound of the critical moment. The desperate, final attempt played out endlessly within the historical architecture. 10. Rehoboth Beach. Boardwalk. Rehoboth Beach. The Rehoboth Boardwalk, rebuilt countless times since the 1870s, is a structure of relentless denial. It stands against the Atlantic, attempting to deny the sea's relentless claim over the shifting shore. Historical records from the U.S. Life-Saving Service confirm the constant peril faced by surfmen patrolling the coast between stations 23 and 24. These men risked their lives in fog and severe winter gales, often searching for wrecked debris or, more frequently, unrecoverable drowning victims. The current boardwalk pavement effectively overlays decades of lost timber and sand that swallowed immense undocumented tragedy, especially during the peak era of coastal shipping. Late-night sanitation crews and concession workers, responsible for securing the stands after the summer crowds disperse, consistently report a recurring acoustic anomaly near the North End's pavilion. This involves the distinct sound of heavy, waterlogged boots striking wet wood. Crucially, the acoustic signature always recedes toward the dunes and the older, less trafficked section of the beach, never approaching the observer. This phenomenon is reliably followed by a strong, momentary olfactory presence, the unmistakable scent of cold brine, rusted iron, and saturated oilskin worn by coastal patrols. Documentation confirms that in the bitter winter of 1904, surfman Silas Vance vanished during a routine patrol near the area now occupied by the Funland Pier. His lantern was later recovered floating just offshore, and his body was never officially listed as recovered. Local folklore attributes the persistent, receding footsteps to Silas, perpetually continuing his assigned watch, a dedication to duty that transcends his physical loss. His distress call remains silent, but the cold, wet air is a palpable indicator of his lingering vigilance along the Delaware coastline. 11. Ryves Holt House, Lewis. The Ryves Holt House, dating to 1665, functions not only as the oldest surviving structure in Delaware, but also as a fixed point for localized trauma. Its operational history includes extensive periods as a chaotic traveler's inn and tavern, environments conducive to unrecorded violence and sudden, anonymous death throughout the 17th and 18th centuries. The sustained paranormal activity reported by structural conservators and historical society volunteers suggests that this foundational violence has resulted in a permanent metaphysical signature within the clapboard and foundation. The primary manifestation is consistently identified as the Woman in Blue, a spectral entity observed near the steep central staircase and the original hearth. Witnesses report extreme, localized drops in temperature, sometimes exceeding 30 degrees Fahrenheit, below the ambient, immediately preceding the apparition's visualization. This figure is frequently described wearing period indigo cloth, appearing melancholy and non-responsive. Archival records offer no definitive identity, leading historians to conclude she was likely a transient resident or servant who expired violently while the house functioned as an inn. This residual haunting phenomenon is highly cyclical, with activity spiking during the late autumn and early winter months, often correlated with high wind events echoing the Atlantic coastline's severe weather. Documentation confirms physical interaction with the environment, including the verifiable displacement of small objects and sudden, chilling auditory phenomena described as soft weeping from empty rooms. The structure's age guarantees that these cold, historical echoes remain an active component of the house's enduring presence in Lewis. Belmont Hall, Smyrna, Kent County. Belmont Hall, constructed in 73, stands as a pristine example of colonial Georgian architecture near Smyrna. It was home to Governor Thomas Collins, but its stately appearance masks a deeply unsettled history focused on the tragedy of his daughter. The documentation suggests that following her untimely death, often localized to a protracted illness or consumption, the house shifted from an emblem of status to a focal point of residual despair, witnessed primarily in the upper levels of the structure and concentrated around the central staircase. Reports cataloged by regional investigators consistently cite a distinct sensory anomaly: the sudden, intense scent of antique lavender or rosewater, frequently preceding colder thermal readings. These olfactory markers are usually concentrated near the grand central staircase or the second-floor master suites. Witnesses, including preservation staff and authorized overnight security, have logged audio events described not as screams, but as quiet, sustained weeping, often accompanied by the audible cadence of small, light footsteps moving across bare floorboards when the building is verifiably empty and locked. The accumulated evidence suggests an intelligent rather than purely residual haunting. Unlike common thermal decay, the unexplained cold spots are localized and reportedly movie, indicating a possible directed presence. The entity believed to be Collins's daughter interacts minimally, but her manifestation serves as a persistent, low-level atmospheric contamination of the historic site, asserting a non-negotiable claim over the structure built by her father. A claim underscored by the documented sound of a distinct closing door that has no physical counterpart in the environment. 13. Woodland Beach, Old Boardwalk Site, Smyrna Coastal Area. The remains of the old Woodland Beach Boardwalk are not visible, swallowed by the shifting sands and the unrelenting pull of the Delaware Bay. For decades, this isolated stretch of coastline served as a crucial cultural center, a thriving pavilion where music and celebration provided a temporary escape from the rigid strictures of the era. The structure, built on pilings over the tidal marsh, was the literal and emotional cornerstone of the community it served. When the relentless nor'easters finally struck in the mid-1960s, they did not just splinter the wood, they dismantled a memory, displacing families and silencing a vital social history, leaving behind only scattered, splintered pilings and an unnatural stillness where laughter once echoed across the water. Coastal survey records and local police blotters occasionally log reports regarding the former site, though the documented evidence is often dismissed as acoustic distortion caused by the unique bay topography and the proximity to the Army Corps Channel. However, those who frequent the remote marshlands after a significant high tide or during periods of thick coastal fog report a distinct auditory anomaly originating from where the dance floor once stood. Witnesses describe a faint, rhythmic sound that is clearly distinct from the wind or crashing waves of slow, slightly distorted jazz music, characterized by a persistent, melancholic piano loop and the barely audible scuffing of shoes against wood. The volume never increases. It remains precisely at the threshold of certainty, compelling the listener to step closer to the treacherous waterline to confirm its source. Experts hypothesize that the specific density of the marsh clay and the water table act as a natural resonator for subtle seismic or atmospheric disturbances, explaining the echoing sounds. But this technical explanation fails to account for the emotional specificity of the phenomenon, reported across 50 years of documentation. Local history asserts that the very last scheduled dance held at the pavilion concluded abruptly when the foundations began to buckle under the strain of the accelerating storm surge. The rhythmic sound that persists is not merely an echo of the past. It is the final, unfinished moment of collective joy abruptly terminated. Visiting the site demands caution, not due to structural danger, but because the rhythm persistently beckons the listener to join a party that has been repeating its catastrophic end, drawing them toward the broken pilings submerged just beneath the churning surface. Woodland, Fenwick Island Lighthouse, Sussex County, southeast coast. The Fenwick Island Lighthouse, commissioned in 1858, represents an era of grueling, solitary coastal duty. For 82 years, the tower demanded constant, precise human maintenance against the volatile maritime environment. When the light was automated in 1940, the expectation was that the human presence would simply be replaced by reliable electrical mechanisms, ending the cycle of physical isolation and psychological stress that characterized the early keepers' lives. However, the subsequent decades have cataloged unexplained activity, suggesting that the automation was never fully accepted by the tower's initial custodians. The most chilling accounts concern the immediate period following destaffing, when local residents reported seeing the lamp flicker with unnatural speed, a pattern inconsistent with the new system's timing. Current preservationists and maintenance personnel frequently document localized cold spots within the lower gallery, irrespective of ambient weather conditions. More unsettling are the auditory phenomena reported specifically from the spiral ascent. The heavy, measured tread of leather boots is sometimes audible on the cast iron stairs, sometimes accompanied by the faint, metallic screech of an oil can being deployed. Despite the stairs remaining empty and the lantern room's original Fresnel lens having been dismantled decades ago, these noises are not random. They tend to manifest during periods of intense coastal fog or severe weather, suggesting a persistent dedication to duty rather than mere residual energy. The accumulated documentation points toward a haunting not motivated by anguish, but by rigid routine. The implication is that a former keeper remains conscientiously performing the rounds necessary to maintain the light, oblivious to or actively rejecting the technological replacement. The Fenwick light operates today fully by electronic timing, yet those responsible for its upkeep speak in hushed tones about the distinct, unnerving sensation of being closely scrutinized, watched over by a highly critical and entirely invisible inspector who refuses to abandon his post. 15. Cannonball House, Lewis. The Cannonball House in Lewis, Delaware, stands as a stark monument to the War of 1812. Its very name derived from the embedded British projectile still visible in its foundation, built around 1760. The house, currently serving as a museum, holds the deep, cold, impressive history, particularly the bombardment of April 6th, 1813, when HMS Poitiers and her smaller consorts rained iron upon the town. Historians confirm the cannonball struck the dwelling, though locals whisper the true scars are less structural and more spiritual. The primary historical occupant whose presence persists is that of Daniel and Sarah Rowland and their family, who sheltered within during the attack. Their terror, thick and immediate, seems interwoven with the very fabric of the pre-revolutionary clapboard. Visitors often report a profound, inexplicable chill near the kitchen hearth, even in the height of summer. This location, central to the family's survival, is linked to the legend of a young girl, possibly Sarah Rowland's daughter, who was not killed by the bombardment but by a sudden, fatal illness shortly thereafter. Employees speak of witnessing small, rapid movements in peripheral vision, a flicker of faded dress, the sound of a shoe scraping stone always near the hearth, or the narrow, steep stairs leading to the upper floors. These occurrences are often accompanied by the distinct smell of sulfur and damp wool, remnants of the historical setting the house retains, and perhaps the fear of gunpowder. The most unnerving manifestation involves an antique cradle housed in the upper bedroom, historically used by the Rowlands. Custodians have repeatedly found the cradle rocking slowly, deliberately, even when windows are sealed and no drafts are present. Recording equipment placed near the cradle by amateur paranormal investigators consistently captures residual energy signatures and faint, childlike whimpering that fades quickly into the general ambient noise of the old house. It is the persistent, palpable sense of maternal distress, Sarah Rowland's fear mingled with unending grief for the child she could not save from disease after surviving the war, that cements the Cannonball House not merely as a historical site, but as a site of enduring, documented sorrow. And there you have it, 15 chilling locations proving that the first state is certainly not short on lingering spirits. But the darkness isn't confined to these few spots, and Delaware is just the beginning. The East Coast is riddled with spectral activity far beyond the Delmarva Peninsula. To ensure you don't miss our next deep dive into America's most haunted geography, hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell. In the meantime, tell us in the comments, which restless state should we investigate next? Find our full list of sources and creepy travel guides linked in the description below. Until next time, stay safe and watch your back.